I will call to order the Personnel Policy Curriculum Committee meeting, which was duly noticed on September 28th, 2023, through the posting and notification of the press in accordance with Wisconsin 19.84. What are you doing?
I was looking who we're missing.
Oh, Lisa. She can't be here. Notice is hereby given that school board members who are not members of this committee may attend this meeting so as to constitute a quorum of the Board of Education. Any such board member attendance will be for information gathering only and will not result in direct decision-making by the Board of Education at the committee meeting. I have a safety message. This will be quick. Just a few little tips for fall. Number one, you will appreciate this. Commissioner Murray, never leave burning candles unattended. While glowing candles make any environment feel cozier, remember to keep burning candles away from anything that could burn, such as curtains, bedding, or books. Always extinguish a candle before going to bed or leaving the house. Never leave children or pets alone with a burning candle. One time, one of my cats had some singed whiskers from a candle. And I actually really like the battery-operated candles. Now, some of them look really realistic. They do. And, like, the wick will... I mean, I just don't worry about them. You can, don't give me those strange looks. Also, watch for roadway hazards. There are a lot of hazards, especially wildlife on roadways at this particular time of year. I think November, this is October, obviously, but November, you're at like a significantly increased risk of running into deer at any other time of the year. So you just need to carefully watch for deer, turkeys, and other critters. I mean, I think right now it's the squirrels that you have to look out for the most. And then one other thing I'm going to tell you, and I remember this from my commuting days when I was teaching in a rural area, to be on the lookout for large farming equipment on the roads as we're doing, harvesting and things like that. You really need to make sure that you're paying attention and giving plenty of space for those vehicles and other drivers. Okay, I will leave more safety tips for the next time. I know you're excited.
I can't wait.
Okay. I need a motion to adopt the October 2nd agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Okay, moving on to our presentation on professional learning communities with Dr. Allison DeGraff and Chris Medenwaltz. Thanks.
Awesome. All right, good evening or afternoon, however you like to look at that. Allison and I are going to go through a variety of things. We've asked a couple principals to be here to get into some specifics as well of how some things play out, but we wanted to talk about professional learning communities and give you a little bit of why we think this is a really important lever for us to pull, and both culturally and structurally, a little bit of what they are from a really like 30,000 foot view, and then how it integrates down into their level at the building level. So first of all, the why focus on this? And the first part is teaching's become incredibly complex. And we know that no teacher can possibly meet the needs of every student they see. High school students see in the neighborhood of 120 students. Alone, they can't meet every need of 120 students. And at the elementary level, when you see them over and over and over again, right, there's some similarities there. So we know it's really important for teachers to be able to work together. And teachers have always worked together. Right? It's not like professional learning communities are like, oh, teachers didn't used to work together in 1963? Like, no, of course they did. But they work together differently than what we're asking them to do right now. Another reason why is we really want teachers to help teachers get better. There's not enough administrators, there's not enough coaches, we couldn't possibly provide enough resources for teachers to get better. One of the statistics that leads towards student learning that has a high statistical, why can't I think of the word?
Probability?
Nope.
Okay.
Effect size, there we go, thank you. High effect size is collective teacher efficacy. And what this really means is that teachers believe in their overall ability to help students move forward. So Mark might think, yeah, I'm absolutely confident that kids come in my classroom, I can move them forward. Not so sure about Chris, right? That's not collective teacher efficacy. How would he know, right, that he could trust me? If we collaborated together, right? If he knew what I did in the classroom, if we worked on instructional strategies together, if we looked at our student data together and said, you know what, this is how we're going to move student forward. Then he could trust and say, you know what, doesn't matter if you got me or if you got Chris, right? You're going to get somewhere. And that collective teacher efficacy. So what we really want is to see actions that show that teachers are demonstrating the continuous interest in each other's growth. And that's why we want to focus on this. So what is it? In its simplest form, it's a never-ending process that we work together to ensure higher levels of learning. Now there's a variety of ways to look at that and what it looks at. And the quote is actually from a book that was written by Rick DeFore, and I'm sure Commissioner Myers is familiar where Mr. DeFore used to work at Lincolnshire in Illinois, and is often thought of as the father of professional learning communities. We were fortunate enough, and Allison will talk a little bit about this, as we had his predecessor come and work with our 612 folks last year to do some things with this. But kind of what stands out to me and what might stand out to you in looking at that is they're working together, right? Not separately, not, yes, we work in the same building, yes, we're in the same hallway, but we really are working together to do some things. And we're doing it to ensure higher levels of learning. So a couple things with that is, in working together, if you think about, well, teachers have always worked together. And the example I gave our new staff was the difference between marathon runners and soccer players. Marathon runners all share the same goal. They've all worked very hard. They all start in the same place, right? They're all trying to finish. They are assuredly not working together, but they do have a common goal, right? So it's not just the goal. They need to work together, where soccer players, right, also have a common goal, but are working together for their overall success, right? It's not about individual success. It's about overall success. And ensuring higher levels of learning, and you are all experienced enough people that I think I can use this example. You may have remembered a time when Coca-Cola introduced New Coke. You cannot buy New Coke. You can't buy New Coke because it stunk. But Coke didn't blame the consumers for not drinking New Coke. And as teachers and educators, we can't blame students for not learning, right? Are there barriers in the way? But it's our job, right, to make sure that students are learning and do our best to remove as many barriers as we can. We believe professional learning communities allows us to do that because we work together, because again, no one staff member can have all the knowledge and skills to meet the needs of every single student. So there's three big ideas in a professional learning community. Holy cow, I'm moving slower with my paper than I am up here. So the purpose of the school is to assure high levels of learning. And again, I'm not saying that we haven't always done this. But sometimes it's easy to say, you know what, well, most kids can learn, right? Well, most kids can learn something. But one of the things I shared with our new staff members is, do you really want to call home and say, you know, Mrs. Manuel, Chris is a really nice kid. You don't have your expectations too high for him. I don't know how much Chris can learn, right? I mean, most kids can learn, but I don't know about Chris, right? Like, we would never do that. But sometimes, right, that creeps in. So in professional learning communities, we will focus on, you know, it's high levels of learning for all students. That might mean a little different thing for some students than others, but we're going to have high expectations for our students. It's a collaborative culture, so we're going to work together, and I've talked about that a bunch. But we believe that when you hire on in the School District of Janesville, you're not an independent contractor. You're going to work with others. And this is pretty common in a lot of other areas, right? I think Commissioner Murray would say, yep, when we hired firefighters, we expected them to work together, not work alone to do some things. Sometimes in education, that gets a little more difficult because you work so often in isolation. Right? You have your room, right? You have kids assigned to you on your roster, but we collectively want to take responsibility for student learning. So it's a collaborative culture. And the last thing is we're going to talk about, did students learn or did we teach it? And the easiest way to think about it, I had a superintendent a few years ago tell me, Chris, we're not painters. We don't cover stuff, right? We're going to assure that students learn it. And we're going to keep working at it until they do. So those are really the three big ideas of a professional learning community. And if the two takeaways you have of remembering when people say, well, when they talk about this PLC stuff, right? If you can remember the three big ideas, right? And the four critical questions. And these, I think, are inarguable of questions as educators we should be able to answer, right? The first one is, what do we want kids to know and be able to do? Right? It seems pretty straightforward. We should have an idea of this is what they're going to learn in this class, right? This is what we want them to be able to do, whether it's a FIAD class, whether it's a AP Cut class, whether it's a reading class in third grade, right? We should have an idea of what we want them to do. How are we going to know they did it, right? It can't be enough to say, well, I taught them that. How do you know, right? What did we do to have some type of an assessment of how we know? And what are we going to do about it if they don't? Right? When I was a high school student, what are we going to do about when they don't? You know what we did? We failed them. That's what we did. And that's, while it happens sometimes, that should not be our default, right? When students don't know, are unable to do some things, we should respond in a way that helps them get there. The last thing is we have some students, they already know it. So what do we do with them? We have some students who come in, say, oh, I can already do that. Well, then our job is to try to extend them somewhere else, right, and try to get them to do more. So really the four big ideas are the four critical questions. And in a professional learning community, and what we've asked our staff to do is we get real tight on question one, what we want students to do. We think whatever you're doing at Roosevelt should be, yep, we want students to know the same things when they're at Kennedy, when they're at Wilson, right? And the same thing at Parker and Craig. If you're in English 10, right, what we want you to know and be able to do should be the same thing at English 10, no matter what English 10 looks like. We get real tight on that. We get a little bit looser on how will we know it, but we're still pretty tight on some things, right? We have some ways we think work really well. How you go about it as a teacher, right, we think that's up to you until it doesn't work. Okay, so Mark and I both teach algebra, right? And Mark's kids continually get it, and my kids don't. Like, eventually I probably should look at Mark and like, maybe you could help me out some, right? Because your kids keep getting it and my kids don't, right? So maybe we should collaborate so that I can get better, so that Mark can say, you know what? Doesn't matter if you have me or if you have Chris, right? You're going to get somewhere in algebra. So those are really the big things. Allison's going to go through a lot of things about, well, what have we done to make sure that we can function as a professional learning community, and get into some of the specifics. So I don't think I even covered any of your stuff. I don't think I stole any of your thunder.
Yes, so tonight as we talk about professional learning communities, you may hear two different terms. You might hear professional learning teams and professional learning communities. And those professional learning teams are that group of educators that's getting together every week. Maybe they're planning after school or during a prep period in their grade level team or their content area team. They're looking at maybe the recent unit assessment or quiz that students had taken, analyzing the data, and then making instructional decisions. Did our students understand what we taught? If there were students that did not understand, what are we going to do to reteach or to support them? So that's the professional learning team. It's what we do as part of a professional learning community. But a professional learning community is really about building a culture in the school. And so a professional learning community is really that intentional school improvement strategy that we really want to help reduce the amount of educators working in isolation and create greater collaboration among our school teams in order so that they can share their expertise and insights with each other in order to help improve student learning. And so it's really about how, as leaders, are we building that culture where we believe teachers want to work in collaboration and not in isolation. And so as part of building that culture, it's more about this is what we do, not what we want to do sometimes or if I decide to, but this is what we believe is a best practice for students. And how we do that is meet in professional learning teams. And I think we've all had that experience. We've probably all worked on a team where everyone is really good about sharing ideas and you feel like you grow as a professional because you learn from others, and you're able, to share those ideas to improve your own skill set as a professional. And we've probably also all worked in teams where people really don't like to share and they're not very collaborative, and that makes it very difficult to grow as a professional and to want to be able to move forward. And so we want that culture to be that we want to work together. And we want to rely on each other because we have so many experts in our building and so many teachers that do an amazing job. So why wouldn't we learn from each other? And I think we think about that as an example too. If you're going to the doctor and you'd have to have a knee surgery, I'm sure you would want to have a doctor doing the surgery that works with other professionals, that knows the latest research, that talks about different techniques and what's going to be to help you have the best outcome, once you have that surgery as well too. And so in any profession, we really want that to be the culture, and we want who our kids have to be somebody that works with that group of expertise. So when we continue to talk about professional learning communities and what are we doing for professional development, we know that we want to provide professional development in order to have a common vision and understanding about what is a professional learning community and what does a professional learning team do, as they talk about those 4 critical questions that Chris referred to. So some of the training that we've provided the last 2 years at Parker, we had a PLC Live Institute that was optional in August. And over the past 2 years, we've had almost 300 educators attend the PLC Live Institute. And so it's been nice as we onboard new teachers that they have an opportunity for a training as well. And then last year, all of our K-12 schools attended a 6-day PLC Coaching Academy. And that was with the principal, instructional coach, and some of the teacher leaders in their building. And during those six days, they had a facilitator who really helped establish, here's our vision for professional learning communities, here's the process and the protocols that we use in order to help teachers better understand their data and better understand how to use that data to change instructional practice. And so the facilitators for the professional learning communities had been teachers themselves, had been principals, and some of them superintendents, and both of their schools had won state and national awards for student achievement. And so we really had excellent facilitators that really helped our school teams develop their professional learning community culture, and they developed kind of a guiding coalition. So now you kind of have trainers of trainers within your building. So once that facilitator leaves, you have people in the building that can train new staff as they come into the building. So that was an important model for us to use. And so what we want to do at this time is we have an elementary and a secondary principal that can share with you a little bit about, after attending that professional learning coaching academy, what did that look like in their building as they implemented professional learning communities and professional learning teams. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Grant from Harrison School. Wherever you're most comfortable. You can stay. You can stay, just turn on the microphone.
Beautiful. Chris, thanks for the help, Chris.
Yeah, glad to help.
All right. So thanks, Allie and Chris, for that setup. So they invited me here today to just sort of share a little bit about our journey at Harrison. And so I'm going to take you back, actually start out a couple years ago, because this is where Harrison's journey really started. And so that was for the 2021-22 school year. And so the year previously we had, that was 2021, and there was COVID. We were dealing with the pandemic. kind of coming out of that as we went into 21, 22. And also that year, I had just hired 7 new homeroom teachers out of 14. So literally half of my homeroom teachers were going to be new for that 21, 22 school year. And so I knew that onboarding those teachers was going to be more important than ever, and helping to build that collective teacher efficacy that Chris talked about. And so I had read some books and some articles about PLCs, and I was familiar with DeFore's work. And so my academic learning coach and I decided that we were going to give PLTs a shot. And so one of the first things that we did was built in the time into the elementary schedule, which is a little bit tricky. But so we built in an hour of time for each grade level during the week during their prep time, when we were going to meet and we were going to have these PLTs. And so we knew it wasn't going to be perfect, but we were committed to sort of jumping in and getting started. And so that first year, so 21, 22, the academic learning coach and I went to each of those PLT meetings. So 6 hours a week, we were there in the PLT meetings. And my academic learning coach, her name is Liza, she's wonderful. She and I pretty much drove the process the whole first year. We were the ones facilitating the team meetings. We were the ones taking the notes. The teachers would come and they'd be like, okay, what do you want us to talk about this week? You know, what data do you want us to bring next week? And it was not their fault. That was kind of, we were just jumping in and getting started. But it really was us owning the process instead of the teachers during that first year. And also what we noticed is we were really spending a lot of time talking about the data after everything was already done. Like they had taken the unit assessments, the kids had moved on to the next unit, working on different skills, but we were always talking about old data. So we knew some things needed to change for the next year, but we weren't really sure how to get there. And that's where Chris and Allie really came in and helped us out with the PLC Live that they mentioned. I had a lot of my new teachers went to that. I went to that and really started to help just build our own skill base with the PLT process. And then really what was hugely instrumental, I think, for Harrison's journey is the 6 days of training that we had throughout last year, where we were able to take that guiding coalition of teacher leaders. So then it was me and my academic learning coach, but then we also added our reading interventionist to the team. And I think what was key was we added 3 homeroom teachers to that group of people that got trained. And so that training was absolutely phenomenal in helping to build the why behind PLCs and PLTs, and explaining what the 3 big ideas are and what the 4 questions are and why we even want to do that. And so then what was awesome after that is we would come back from each of those days of training and we would share out the information with the rest of the teaching staff. But it was no longer me and Liza who were doing those PDs. It was primarily the 3 homeroom teachers who were out front and center and really saying, like, you guys, this is pretty great and this is going to have big impact for students. So I think that was a huge shift for us, which was awesome. And so another change that we made was we knew that we had to switch it from Liza and I being the ones who were primarily facilitating to turning that ownership over to the teachers and to the grade levels. And so that was a huge goal that we had last year. Was we started with it being me and Liza, and then we did sort of the gradual release model where we were still there at the meetings, but we were turning it over to the teachers to be the ones to facilitate, the ones to take the notes. We were still there as resources to answer any questions, that kind of thing. But by the end, we had stated that the goal by the end of the year was for each of those grade level PLTs to really be able to be self-sufficient in that process and be able to analyze the data on their own, take the notes, figure out what they wanted to bring the next week, kind of all on their own. And so I'm really excited because we were able to get to that point. Another change that we made last year was that we made it a non-negotiable that each PLT had to pick a consistent data protocol that they were going to use that addressed the 4 questions that Chris laid out. And so that kept us more on track instead of like coming together and talking about the field trip permission slips or the 100 other things that grade levels could want to talk about. We really, by picking that data protocol that just has the 4 questions, that really kept us much tighter on the data analysis and being more responsive in our practice and in our instructional strategies. And like they talked about also, then it was, if we're looking at the data and one teacher's class really did score a lot higher, it really became like, oh my God, that's awesome. How did you do that? How did you teach that skill? Because we're teaching the same thing, but the kids did much better in your classroom. I want to learn from you. So it became like this weekly, more or less like job embedded PD, where they were really working and helping each other grow, which was awesome. And so we are starting to see some results from that. Even just looking at our forward scores going into this. So our forward scores overall on forward, we went up 2% for ELA, which is not a lot, but it was our first year of Wonders implementation, and anytime you have a new resource, you kind of expect a dip. And so to have a 2% overall score go up for ELA and then 9% for math. So we are super excited about that. And then, so we definitely, that was something that we celebrated, but like Chris said, the PLT it's a never ending process. We're never there, we're never done. And so we're already with that guiding coalition at the end of last year, okay, what changes do we want to make for next year now? So now we fast forward to this year. A couple of the things that we realized is by meeting during the day, there were people that we weren't able to get to the table because they were with students. And so one of our biggest subgroups at Harrison is our students with disabilities, but we were never able to get our special ed teachers to be able to come to those PLTs because they were doing IEP minutes with students. And so we made the decision as a guiding coalition and as a school that we were gonna move our PLTs to after school, so that everybody who needed to be there could be at the table. And so that was a big ask because we're asking people to commit to not holding meetings after school on Wednesdays, to not making appointments for themselves or their kids on Wednesdays after school, because we really do need everybody to be there. But that was something that our guiding coalition really felt was important, and I completely agree. And so now we have started that this year where we're meeting after school. And our special ed teachers, our EL teachers, even our student services team are coming together and being part of that PLT process, because it really is an all hands on deck sort of situation to ensure high levels of learning for every student. You need every single staff member to be a part of that process. So that was one of the changes that we made this year. It's awesome because we all meet together in the LMC. So it's not even like first grade is there and kindergarten's down the hall. It is literally like the whole Harrison staff is in the LMC working together, which is awesome. So that was great. The other change that we made at the end of last year going into this year is that we realized that we had not built in enough time before the start of the school year to look at student data so that we were ready on day one when kids came in. So we were doing that process usually in September. It's like, oh, we want to get to know our kids first, and then we'll start putting them in small groups for reteaching or intervention. And we decided we do not have that luxury. There's no time that we can waste. With that, we need to be ready for them on day one. And so we built in time in August. One afternoon, a Monday afternoon, we did ELA, and a Tuesday afternoon, we did math. And PLTs got together and they looked at the end of the year data for their students that were coming in, and they planned those guided reading groups, they planned the reteaching groups, which students were gonna be in there. We knew that we'd have to make some changes once kids came in, but that allowed us to get started. We started all of those small reteaching groups already on September 11th, which was only the 5th day of school, I think. So we were able to get those up and running right away. And then another shift that we're making this year is really a much tighter focus on that formative data. So the little quick checks along the way so that we can use the information to change our instruction before we get to the unit assessment and it's kind of done. So I would say that that's another change that we've been making for this year. But overall, you know, it's been a relatively short amount of time, and I'm incredibly proud of the Harrison staff for how far they've come. They have really, truly embraced this process. I thank Chris and Ally too for the professional development that they provided, because we would not be in the spot that we are right now without that. So I just wanted to thank them too. So I know that was kind of a lot, and I talked pretty fast, but that's Harrison's journey in a nutshell.
Nice work.
Thank you.
Yeah, so go ahead, Chris, and share from our secondary
Sure.
perspective.
So the journey at the high school, we've had professional learning communities for a long time. That's not a concept that's new to anyone. And we've made efforts to try to facilitate common work time for teachers. We've had our schedule morphed so that each department has a common planning hour, which is sort of a big to-do in a high school schedule. You know, we've done a lot of things to help facilitate and support that, but recently, in the last couple of years, some of the decisions that have been made at the district level to support high schools have really helped accelerate our work. And those are the things that I'm most excited about that I want to talk about. One of the first accelerators in our PLT work is AVID. We're continuing our implementation of AVID across the building. And AVID really, truly, when it all comes down to it, it's a way to help teach teachers how to support kids with the best possible professional development and learning strategies that you can give them. We had a PD session on Friday, and a good portion of that was talking about, here are some really good high yield strategies that you can use. We want to make you aware of them. We want to help you understand how to use them so that you can implement those things in your classroom. So AVID is one piece of that. Another piece of that is the work that's been done to bring the PLC Live and the PLC Live Academy and the training to our school, because we've had the opportunity to train more people and help more people understand the process and the importance of collaboration in PLCs. Previously, we had, you know, myself, the APs, the ALCs, we were pretty versed in these things, but it wasn't until we started getting teachers the same level of high quality professional development that they've been afforded where we've started to really see some movement there. The other thing that's been a really big accelerator for us is having some common data points that we didn't have previously. This past spring, we piloted something called Mastery Prep, and the best way to describe that is it's a progress monitoring tool that we can use a couple times a year to predict how kids are doing in meeting their ACT benchmarks. So all of our kids in 9th and 10th grade take the pre-ACT, all of our 11th graders take the ACT, so we're using Mastery Prep in the core areas 3 times a year to help us progress monitor and make mid-course corrections on their learning in the individual courses so that kids can be more successful when they're taking that also important ACT test. What does that look like on a day-to-day basis? Like I said, all of our departments have common planning time, and really our mission is to increase the achievement of all kids through collaboration. It's very important that people are all in, that they're working together, and we really do frame our work around those 4 questions. You know, the first thing we do when we talk about what we want kids to learn, well, we have to have a conversation about what are the standards that everyone should be working towards. What is the pacing that we're going to follow relatively? What are some of the high yield strategies that we can use? And what does our curriculum tell us that what we should be doing? And again, it's not that we're dictating how people teach, it's to what level we want people to instruct and what level of achievement we want our kids to get to. That second question, how do we know if kids are learning? What does success look like? We're working to help teachers build formative assessments to check kids' learning as they're going along in the progression of the curriculum. We're having them look at exemplar work. So if all 9th graders are doing an essay, what do we think the top of their skills is, what is the middle, and what is the, we've got some work to do, because understanding that continuum helps us guide kids better to reach the goals that we want them to reach. Collaboratively scoring work, that's some things that teachers are doing to help make sure that they're assessing in a similar way and understanding how all those pieces go together. All the while we're doing that, we're looking at their mastery prep data, we're having conversations with teachers about, okay, where are these key concepts that we're doing well in, located in our curriculum, and more importantly, where are the key concepts in our curriculum that can give kids the biggest bounce in their performance on these tests. For example, we know that conventions in English are a very important part of the ACT test. So, teacher teams are talking about, okay, what do we instruct in 9th grade English, 10th grade English, 11th grade English? How do those things spiral together so that we have a continuum of instruction and skills developed by the time they're taking their ACT? Other things that we're doing to help support that, looking at the data, we build teachers' SLO, which is a part of their evaluation on mastery prep data that their PLC is working with. So we're constantly looking back at common data points, making decisions about instruction, and then looking at how can we make some course corrections in the classroom to get the outcomes that we want. As far as that third question, what do we do when students struggle? A lot of it is creating an action plan, looking at that formative data that is coming in week by week to say, okay, this skill they've secured, this we need to come up with some better things and more experiences to help them secure those skills. And then having conversations in teacher teams about, okay, here's a strategy I had that worked well. How could we use this? How can I learn from my colleagues? It's really not just looking at data, it's ongoing professional development for teachers too, because we have the AVID strategies that we can pull from. We have the strategies that we're learning from PLC Live that we can incorporate too. And then what do we do when kids excel? The fourth question, again, that's developing extensions for kids based on in-time need so that we can continue to challenge all kids on the curriculum. Just a couple of words about the formulation of our PLCs. If you look at just our core areas, we have about a dozen PLC teams that meet on a weekly basis. In English, for example, we have an AP and a vertical team, an English 9, English 10, and English 11. So it's possible that a teacher could be on one or more PLCs depending on the courses that they teach, what their assignment is, but it's important to us that everybody's present and collaborating during that time. And when I say everybody, that also means the EL teacher that supports the class, that also means a special ed teacher that's co-teaching, because we want to make sure that everybody's working together, everybody's leveraging what they know to help kids be successful. So really, truly, we've gained a lot of momentum in the last couple years with our PLCs. We've got work to do. We know our achievement isn't where we want it to be, but I'm very encouraged by the work that our teachers are putting in. And I think, just like Jess said, we're at a point now where they're starting to own the data that we're collecting. And they're starting to ask questions about, why is the data the way it is? And if I alter this, what would be the result? And that really is where I think we start to make some ground with kids in their learning. Just helping teachers see it in a different way, help them problem solve and strategize, and giving them the skills to make that happen.
Thank you, Jess and Chris. So did an excellent job of explaining what that looks like from the 6-day training and the professional learning opportunities to how does that actually become actionable in a building, and what does that look like? And so, thank you, because it was a very heavy lift. And they, along with their other principal colleagues have done a really heavy lift, as well as the teachers, to make this happen, and so we're very appreciative of that. And also, one piece on that first question that we talk about, what do we want students to know and be able to do? Something that we've worked hard on as a district and in our buildings as part of this process is developing common assessments, so that, whether I'm taking the Unit 1 assessment in Wonders at Harrison or Wilson, I'm taking the same assessment, and we're having the same outcome and skills, so we can all talk about the same assessment. If we're giving different assessments, it's hard to share those ideas. So that's been an important part of the practice that we've embedded in this work with our professional learning communities. So just to share a little bit more about what's our data telling us. As a district, our teachers complete a survey, so that tells us a little bit about, it's related to our educator effectiveness evaluation system. And the staff take the survey, and it provides feedback and information to the principals, one, on a little bit about how is the evaluation process working in their building and the feedback they're providing. But the second part is it talks about, in the survey, ask teachers, how are we getting better about teacher collaboration? So because we've been so focused on professional learning communities and collaboration, we wanted to look at those questions related to that and sharing teacher practices. So as we look at the data from the first slide that we've taken across the state, in the last 3 to 4 years, the school district of Janesville our data was right at the state average. So our data was saying we're right where the state is. Now that we've been using professional learning communities, and we look at this first question about how often are we going over student assessment data with other teachers to help make decisions, now we've increased to significantly above the state average. So we're 10% above the state average on strongly agrees related to that question, and overall with strongly agree and agree, 77% in the school district of Janesville and 69% in the state. When we look at the question, how often have you worked with your teachers to develop materials or activities? Again, we were at the state average, and now we're over 11% that strongly agree, and 85% as a district and 77% as the state. And then in the third question, how many times have you worked on instructional strategies with other teachers, which is the real goal of the professional learning community? And again, we're significantly above the state average and strongly agree by 12%. So we know that we are building stronger teacher teams and sharing those instructional strategies. And so it's exciting to see that we're moving forward, and that teachers are also reflecting and telling us that that is getting better and stronger in order to increase our student outcomes. So as we kind of close, again, those 3 big ideas around professional learning communities. We know that, again, I think Chris mentioned this too, this isn't new. For over 20 years, we've been doing professional learning communities. And teachers have always collaborated. Sometimes it just hasn't been, this is what we expect. It's been in pockets or sometimes when we have time. And so we really had to think about, how do we bring this back, as there's been staff, turnover and changes in leadership. So we really wanted to recalibrate. And with that 6-day professional learning community academy with all of our schools K-12, that really helped us set the common vision and action steps to move professional learning communities forward in order to better meet the needs of our students and create that consistency across the district. So that professional learning communities is a topic that we could talk for days about, so trying to narrow it down into, one presentation is difficult, but hopefully you've had an overview and have an understanding of what that looks like in the schools as well. So we'll just take a minute if you have any questions for either Chris or I, or either principal.
Thank you. Excellent presentation and lots of great information, and I like sort of the idea of this being evolutionary. It takes a while. And I do have a question about one of the slides, if you could go back a little bit, a couple of slides really. So this kind of slide right here, I just want to make sure that there's, that I'm understanding it. So that number on the far left there, is that a raw number, three teachers or 3%?
3%.
3%, and, and 13% maybe once or twice, which we might think is, maybe a sign of someone being uncooperative, but it's also, is it possible too that there are teachers out there that are the only teachers of what they teach?
And that's what I was going to share with you. So it might be the art teacher at an elementary school that, sometimes we'll have them get together with their fine art teachers, but they don't have that person to look at on a weekly basis, or they might do it on a professional learning day. And then at high school, you have a lot of singleton courses. So I think it's just reflective of, it's a great question, and you're right. It's some of those that are maybe the only person in their building teaching, or it might be singleton courses and that type of thing as well. So, and also it's evolving. So we don't have 100%, but we're continuing to grow in that way too. But yes, agreed.
Okay, yeah, I didn't want anybody to think that 3% of our teachers are refusing,
No.
To participate or something like that, that's, their circumstances might be quite different, so.
Correct, yeah, and I think the building principals would speak to that they don't have people refusing to do a professional learning community.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
No, I'm thrilled. You guys are awesome.
This was so great. I thank you both for putting together such a thorough presentation, and thanks to both of you for being here because it was really meaningful. We talked about, Allison said that she was going to bring in some principals, and I said that would be great because it shows us the real life action and how it's all, just going out into the world. And I think we've been hearing about PLCs, and we know that you've been working on them, and so we hear like the high level stuff, but this has really broken it down to show, okay, what are we doing, where did we start, how is it being implemented at the district level, but then also what are you doing in your schools. And I mean, Jessica, I really liked how you walked us through your whole process and where you started and where you are. It just was really meaningful, and I could really see and envision it all happening, and it was really great. And so I honestly, some neighbors are walking by and asking me how stuff is going in the school district yesterday, and I was talking about PLCs and Avid, and so I mean, we get questions about this, and it's really helpful to be able to know these details and what work you're all doing. It's so important. I really liked hearing about the growth, and I liked your comment about the job embedded PD. That was really kind of mind blowing in a way, because it is. And one of the things I was wondering, how long are your meetings when you meet on these Wednesdays typically?
So we are committed at Harrison to meeting from 3:20 to 4 o'clock.
Okay. So, I mean, that's good, because I was worried, with these meetings after school that they could be, really cumbersome, but that's a nice amount of time that you're not staying too late, but you're still able to all get together.
Right, because we also want to be very cognizant that people have families and other things that they do need to get to. But that's where too, staying focused on the 4 questions really helps with the efficiency of that. And one of our norms being everybody comes prepared with the data ready to go. So we're not wasting any time. We are just getting down to it. And I think I showed up at 3:21 last week, and all of the PLTs were already off and running. They're yep, let's do it. They are very familiar now with those protocols and what they're doing. And so they hit the ground running, but yes, we were out the door by 4 o'clock.
That's wonderful. And I liked hearing the things that you realized, okay, we realized this, and so we were trying this. And something that made me start to question, I wonder how much is shared then, your success stories, or realizing, hey, this time didn't work for us, we needed to do this. What is shared out with other schools? Because if you're seeing, man, we did this, we changed this in our PLC process, there might be another school that has dealing with the same, challenge, and how much is communicated across the district?
Sure. I mean, you know, what's great in having that 6-day training is we all have the same common understanding and kind of goals and know the direction we're trying to move our buildings. But we try to intentionally plan time during the principal meetings, at least once a month, where principals have an opportunity to, so for example, at our principal meeting last week, we looked at some PLT agendas and we talked about what's effective about this agenda or how would you make this better. And it wasn't Chris and I telling them that. They were in small groups as principals talking about, well, here's how we would make this agenda better in our school, or here's what it looks like. So they're functioning in a PLC too, learning from each other, because that's a huge room of experts as well that can learn from each other. So we try to embed that in our monthly principal meetings to give them that time.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And Chris, I wanted to say, it was really meaningful how you shared how the changes at the district level were facilitating your PLC growth. I mean, that was great to hear how Avid is really helping PLCs become stronger. And, you know, it's all of these different parts that, you know, everyone's been working so hard on. They're not separate, but they're really supporting each other. So I think that was really valuable that you pointed that out, and I'm grateful for that. You know, we again hear these updates, but it's so significant to know that, okay, well, Avid is supporting our PLCs, and you know, probably vice versa. So so thanks for walking us through all of that. And again, I know you have 10 million things to do, but truly it is really beneficial to share your experience with us. And thanks, everyone. Any other comments? Yeah, right. Nothing? Okay. Well, I think we can move on then, but someone is coming back up again. So high school course handbook, course review, Chris Mendenwald.
Yeah, I will try not to get you too sick of listening to me tonight. But I asked Chris to stay for this as well. I think obviously the two of them did an absolutely outstanding job of talking about professional learning communities. And Chris can offer some details and get into some nitty gritty at time, and also correct me when I'm wrong on some things. But I wanted to go through some course updates and talk about kind of how the whole thing works, and everything from course revisions and course selection, and some of the decisions we'll be making soon on the course updates. It really is a continuous process for us. When we get to the point where students are selecting courses, we are starting to have conversations about what will we do differently next year. When we get to staffing, right, we talk about, well, what will we do differently next year, or what do we have to have done in the meantime? And the same thing with the courses we're offering. So it really doesn't stop. There's a few guideposts along the way, and there's a few things we do. And there are also some outside factors that sometimes influence it. Everything from the courses we offer with colleges, or if things like AP make some changes, or if there's any policy changes, or if there's some financial changes at the state level, sometimes can influence what we're doing in the courses. So I'll kind of give you an update of things, and then we'll talk about some specific courses. So how does scheduling work? And many of you may have an idea of a little bit how this works, and I'm positive that Commissioner Myers is pretty familiar with how scheduling works at the high school level. But what we'll get to is what you're used to seeing is students make selections. They have a course guide. They make selections of what they'd like to do and give some preferences on those. One of the things we ask them to do is also offer, well, what if you can't take it, right? What are your alternates? What else would you like? Because it's really impossible for us to take course selections and preferences from students and for every student to get every selection they wanted. It just won't work that way. And how do we make those offerings? Well, some of them are just historical, right? This is what we've always offered. Some of them are based on what you tell us we have to have as graduation requirements, right? So some of those are some of the things we offer. Some of them get into, well, we think this really does help students in college career readiness. Sometimes our TC courses or AP courses might get into that. Some might be in local needs. There might be some specific courses that are offered in Janesville because of the economy in Rock County that somebody at Sauk Prairie High School would say, well, we don't offer that at all because there's really not a need up in this area. So some of it is that. Some of it is student wants, but as we shared at the last PPC, our number one desire of students is to be a professional athlete, and we're not pumping those out like crazy here. We really do try to be cognizant of, well, what is it for our students of what are they going to do post-secondary? And look at some of those offerings. And sometimes we hit the nail on the head in that, and sometimes we fall a little bit short. One of the things that's true, however, in scheduling is the more classes you offer, the more conflicts you will have. The more you put into the system, right, the more complicated it gets. So while it's great that we have a lot of selections for our students, it also means that we will have conflicts. And some of those conflicts we can resolve on our own. Many conflicts students have to resolve on their own by making choices. And what happens is when we have a lot of offerings, so, Commissioner Myers was referencing, we have a small percentage of staff who haven't met with other staff. Well, in our elective areas, in CTE and business and ag, a lot of those courses are singleton courses by nature. So there's only offered once a day. And as soon as you start piling them together against core courses that are also singletons, might be AP Stats, might be AP Chemistry, might be a band or chorus course. Eventually you get conflicts. Sometimes we can move some classes around, but sometimes students just have to make choices on, well, I'd rather have this or that, or I guess I can take that next year, or I guess I won't take it at all. So while we're really proud of all the courses we offer, sometimes we offer courses and it creates our own problem in doing some of that. Then what happens is we use Infinite Campus, and Infinite Campus has a complex algorithm built into it that says we're going to place classes here. And the idea behind it is we're placing classes where there's the least amount of conflicts. And I'll tell you, having built schedules in a couple different high schools, if you can get that conflict matrix to be down really anywhere in about we're 85% good, we only have 15% conflicts, that's pretty good. But 15% is pretty good, and I think I'm probably pretty close on that, Chris, right? It seems like, well, no, why can't we just offer everything? And I'll tell you, some of you, again, are experienced enough, may remember, there used to be a time when if you would schedule, that whole wall would be filled with courses and teachers, and you'd place them up there, right? Well, right, Mr. Menwald's going to teach here, Mr. Lau's going to teach here, right? All that sort of thing would go up. And while that worked, that scheduling was done for one reason. And it was done, right, at the convenience of the adults in the building, right, of what will work for them. The computer algorithm looks at, well, how can we create the fewest amount of conflicts so the students can get the most amount of classes they could? It's still going to create conflicts. And it doesn't mean we don't put some things in there. I would be shocked if Mr. Lau scheduled his softball and baseball coach at the end of the day in second semester, right? Probably wouldn't do that, 8th period. They're going to be gone, so you're going to have to sub. So there's things we can do. Nope, we have some teachers who are really great at doing some particular things, or I really like to have them do lunch duty. Let's not make sure they're not teaching classes that period. There might be some courses we have to offer at a certain time just due to the community involvement with that. But all of those things get into the computer algorithm, really does help us, and then we might mess around with it a little bit, but we try to stay pretty true to that algorithm. The other thing that happens is we build staffing off of what we think we need. So we have a certain number of staff, we have a certain number of students, we have a certain number of periods they can take courses, and we kind of figure that out of like, well, if this is our average class size, then how many staff would we need? And that all works out pretty good, and as we continue to say, well, maybe we could increase class size a little bit because that might reduce staff, right? And that might be financially advantageous to us as long as we can still get students to have their courses. What happens is once we get all that staffing built, and all of you have heard about this sometimes, then some students might want to drop some classes. That's problematic. So if there were 20 students in my class and we let 6 of them drop, there's only 14 students in my class, and I would not have run that class had we done that in May. And what happens is then we appear to be overstaffed at times in some courses. So it's really problematic, and I realize that kids change their mind. I'll be honest, as a high school principal, oftentimes kids change their mind, not so much because they're really changing their mind, but because some of their friends change their mind. That is often a reason. Sometimes they change their mind. Honestly, there's a few other things that happen in kids' lives, and I get that, and it's not that we never let a student drop, but it does change some things because we do build our course schedule based on what they wanted, and when they change their mind, that does become problematic for us staffing. And sometimes if enough students change their mind and drop some courses, then all of a sudden we have to have other staff have overloads, and it doesn't work out all that great. The opposite also happens if all of a sudden next year 30 seniors move into Parker High School and start taking courses, and we staffed at 30 less students. You might think, well, that wouldn't be a big deal. Well, if they were all if there was 30 students in 11th grade and they all got to take English, it might be. It might be a problem. So, but that's a little bit of how scheduling works. Did I sum that up pretty good, Chris? I'm sure I got some things. Yep.
Just to put into perspective, we've got about 1,300 kids at Parker. If they all choose 8 classes a day, that's about 10,800 classes that we need to schedule. 85% of that's about 8,800. So there's about another 2,000 conflicts that we're trying to manage. And that is like assistant principals and counselors literally looking and talking with kids. And Chris is 100% spot on. Typically what happens is the more specific a kid's route of study, the more conflicts that they have. If I'm in orchestra, for example, orchestra at Parker happens first and second hour. We share the orchestra teacher with Craig, so that's the only time orchestra can happen. So we have to be careful to make sure that AP Lit, which is something many of our college-bound kids take, and many of our kids in orchestra, we don't run that the same hour to create a conflict. That's an example of some of the minute details that we have to watch when building a schedule. Chris is also spot on too that we work very hard into the summer to make schedules for kids, and we've gotten much more stringent about the course change process. It's interesting how when kids fill out a form, they have to apply to me to have a course change, and 90% of the time they'll say, I didn't pick this, and then I call them down, I say, well, here's the sheet you filled out, and it's right here, this is what you picked. Oh, yeah, it is. So having raised a couple of children myself, I know they're fickle, but it does have a significant impact if we don't hold kids to their choices. The converse of that is we have a wealth of opportunities, more opportunities than most districts in our area, and we want to continue to give those opportunities to our kids.
Yeah, I was telling Allison as a former high school principal who had his daughter, I could have made it so she never had a conflict, right? I could have built the schedule that way. And there were some times she wasn't all that happy with her dad. I'm like, you're going to have to choose this or this. Well, why? Because this is what the schedule is, right? And we didn't build a schedule for you, right? We built a schedule for everybody. So what happens a little bit with Infinite Campus and how some things worked in there? So we're going to go through some courses and some historical data on some courses that we haven't run recently, but we don't really get rid of courses. It's not like we tear them up and burn them. Really, it's an activation or a non-activation in Infinite Campus is what it is. So we can bring courses back rather easily. We can change some of the things on the back end in Infinite Campus, but really what we're talking is we're really just inactivating them so people can't see them, so students can't select them. Rotation of courses, what happens sometimes, and you might be familiar with this, and this often happens in the elective areas, is we'll rotate classes on an every other year basis. So we'll have a course that is offered, we'll say it's offered odd years and then even years. And sometimes that's really, really helpful because it allows us to offer more courses. It does require students to plan very carefully. Well, I want to take this course right now. Well, you better take it now because next year you can't. So you have to figure out of where that works. We really try to avoid having very many prerequisites, which means you have to do something in order to take it, because that really makes it very difficult and adds a barrier for some students. Sometimes offering those, they start to sort of compete against each other. So if you're in art and you're offering some every other year courses, and you're in CTE and every other year, those courses, when it happens that way, when at the same time you get some competition that way, that doesn't always work. Sometimes with some courses, what we're able to do, besides rotation and some other options, is we're able to offer some courses during the same period. And that might seem odd, but I'll give you an example. Is if I'm in Ceramics 1, right, and Chris took Ceramics 1 last year and would like to take Ceramics 2, there's a good chance we can be in the same period. And the art teacher can give some instruction to everybody in Ceramics 1 and send us off to do some work, and then grab the Ceramics 2 people and say, okay, here's what you're going to do, or work continue from yesterday. So sometimes we're able to do that. Sometimes we're not able to do that as much, but art's probably the easiest area that I can think of that we're able to do that. Sometimes there's some other options for students. One of the things you've heard us talk about is our work-based learning liaison. It's super helpful, honestly, in building a schedule to have students out of the building, right? Because then you don't need a staff member assigned to them. So students who are in youth apprenticeship, students who are in some of our work-based learning co-ops, students who leave to do certain things, that actually helps our schedule when they're doing that, as far as the options we can offer students, and sometimes being able to move some things to solve some conflicts. Plus, you've heard me talk about, there's some things in the work-based learning field we're not set up, and nor we should be set up to teach our students, which is why the partnerships we're building that we're really thankful for to help our students out. Did I miss anything there, Chris? Chris is kind of my built-in lie detector today, and plus he did such a good job, I should have just had him do all this stuff last time. Phenomenal. So I'm going to go through some courses that we've looked at, some historical data, some very recent historical data that shows they haven't run lately. And they haven't run because students really haven't shown a great deal of interest. It doesn't mean there's no interest in these courses. It just means lately, from about the last 3 to 5 years, they haven't consistently run. So as we get into the process of building our course guide for the end of this year, and as we look at new courses that we may want to enter, these are some courses we're going to have to make some decisions on. They may be in that deactivation area of Infinite Campus. And I won't get into all the details of each one of these courses, but I will talk a little bit in generalities about some of them. So I'm just going to get the first chunk up here. So these are all courses that are not running currently and have not run historically in the last, like I said, 3 to 5 years. Now, some of these courses, you'll notice if you're familiar with some things like computer integrated manufacturing, digital electronics, biomedical innovations, engineering design and development. Those are all Project Lead the Way courses. They really are good courses, and they have high-end curriculum. But right now, our students really aren't that interested in taking some of those courses. Part of it is sometimes we offer some courses that are somewhat similar. And part of it is this is the thing that goes back to the more courses you offer, the more conflicts you have. The more courses you offer, the more you offer, the more also don't run. Because there's only so many teachers that can keep teaching courses. So digital electronics might have 16 kids that would like to take it, but we might have another course in that area that has 22 kids. And if all the other courses have more than 16 kids, digital electronics just doesn't run. We only have so many teachers. And what also gets difficult sometimes is the special training that's needed. And every one of those courses requires special training. Not just anybody. We can't just assign somebody digital electronics. Somebody actually has to go through the training to be able to teach digital electronics. Similar to AP, not exactly, but there are some things that are specifics about AP. TC courses are very specific. They must be HLC certified. So some of those things roll into it as well. If you do not have the certifications, you can't teach that. If you're teaching some other courses and they have higher numbers, do we sometimes maybe fudge some of that to make sure some courses are running? Possibly, but we try to stay away from that. We might do it early on to make sure if it's a new course that it starts running to see if it'll go. But if the numbers keep coming back and back, it doesn't go. One of the other things that's true about the course process, and all of you, if you think back to your high school years, might be able to figure out some teachers are kid magnets. They just are, right? So their classes will run because kids love to be in those classes. Some teachers aren't quite as magnetic to kids, and so sometimes some of those courses don't run as much. And as much as I'd like to say that doesn't make a difference, kids are human, right? And you know, there's a saying when you build schedules, right? Kids vote with their feet, right, of where they want to go. So they will tell you, and these are just some courses that we're going to have to make some decisions on because our data tells us, you know what, maybe we're just confusing kids, and kids get real disappointed. Like, well, yeah, but I took biomed innovations. I thought I was going to get that, right? And if it hasn't run, and we kind of historically know it hasn't run, maybe we shouldn't put that out there and create that disappointment and get kids to do some other things. A few other courses, and I'll kind of get through this. Integrated Math 4, and you're going to look at that and say, well, why wouldn't we run that? It's really because we're moving away from the integrated math path, right? We're now in an geometry algebra 2 path, so that's really the last time we're just not going to offer because we're not in an integrated math path. There will be plenty of math courses to take, but integrated math, that's not a numbers issue. We need to remove it, deactivate it from the course guide. Introduction to Mechatronic Systems, a great name, but it hasn't run in quite a while. And then there's a few ones in media production and newspapers, and those just haven't been that popular, and you can imagine a little bit why. You know, I think if we think back 15 years ago, what the Janesville Gazette looked like and what it looks like today, there's a different level of interest and a different way things go with there. But those are the ones when we looked at, okay, what are the, you know, you can look at it, what came to the top or came to the bottom when we looked at the course process. Those are some courses that we're going to have to make some choices on as we get going with some of this. And Chris and I and Allison have had some discussions already about the course selection process and some of the things we're going to do in our next steps. But I don't know, did I miss anything there, Chris? I got pretty much, I mean, and like I said, Chris can answer real specific things, and I can try to help with generalities if you have some questions or comments or other things you'd like.
Thank you. So you were talking about kids that drop classes, and I'm curious as to what the policy is. Is there a drop dead date?
A deadline.
A deadline. Is there? I mean, because I've had students that have tried to drop, and they are shocked that they weren't allowed to drop the class. And you know, I've known of situations like this. What is our policy about that, or how do you handle that?
Well, I'll speak in generalities, and I'll let Chris go in specifics. So there's a drop deadline for a variety of reasons. One is the staffing portion of it. The other part of the reason that you have to have drop deadlines is, so if I'm a student in Commissioner Meyer's class and I'm 3 weeks in, I'm like, I don't like this, and I drop it, where am I going to go? I'm not going to be able to take another class. I can't start another class, right? So then I have to be in a study hall. Well, what if I already have a study hall? What if I have 2 study halls, right? Those sorts of things. So there's a reason that we put that drop in from a logistics standpoint. From part of our job to nurture kids, part of the reason we also honestly put it in there is sometimes kids think they don't want or can't do some things, and sometimes they need a little nudge to say, yeah, you can, and you're gonna. And it's interesting. My guess is Commissioner Myers has found a few kids who wanted to drop, and some of them maybe weren't as successful as she had hoped they'd be, and there was probably a whole lot of them that said, all right, I guess if I'm stuck, I'll do it, and found out they could do it, right? So, Chris?
From a practical standpoint, typically how the year starts, we ask students, they can start submitting their request right away on the first day if they want. We also publicize the fact that our first priority is to get all students that are new to our district a schedule. Because until we have everybody built a schedule, we don't know where there would be opportunities for kids to move. Typically, we look at those applications or those requests to change a schedule for about the next week and a half. So, and we publicize that with announcements and all the things that you would normally do. In a lot of cases, then, Well, in every case, I'm going through one by one and I'm actually approving those because we want to make sure that it's a consistent message and reasoning why we're doing that. And then I hand those off to the counselors, the ones that are approved, and they meet individually with each student and look at, okay, here are your options. And look at how could we fill that, or if not, why can't we fill that request?
Thank you. And then this kind of relates to it. Do we have a minimum threshold for to run a class? A number?
Yes and no on that. Typically, we would, would like at least 16 students. Ideally, we'd like at least 22 students. But I'll be upfront, if we held real tight to that sometimes, some of our upper level and capstone courses probably wouldn't run. I'll give you an example. Sometimes some of our world language courses at the high level wouldn't reach that threshold, but we know it's really important for those students to continue with their schooling in that area. So it often happens in capstone areas for senior level courses. And sometimes we get to the point we just can't do it due to staffing. Like, well, we can't run that one and that one. If you're a teacher and happen to be teaching a couple capstone level courses, maybe one of them doesn't run. I don't know if Chris has got some other.
I think world language is a perfect example. We have 5 years of opportunity because of the classes that they can take at the middle school. In our end of sequence courses, we have opportunities for kids to take the 5th year or an AP course. And oftentimes we end up combining those courses to make sure that we can give kids that experience, and the teacher differentiates so that some of the kids are preparing, well, they're all getting a high quality experience that would allow them to take the AP test, but it's not a requirement with the course that they do that. I mean, obviously, at the end of the day, we want to give kids as many opportunities as possible, but we also have to be fiscally responsible and, and make those decisions early on. The other thing I would add too is, if I have 20 kids that request a class at subject selection, after we put the data into the computer and move things around, we don't always end up with all 20 of those kids sitting in that classroom because of the other choices that they've made and the conflicts in scheduling. So while it may look like, oh boy, 20 is a pretty large number to run a class, or 22, you have to also keep in the back of your mind, they're not all going to get there.
I think actually everybody should hug foreign language teachers and art teachers and elective teachers, because they often are teaching several different classes all in the same hour. And I don't know how they do it. So that kind of also leads me to another question then. And this is my last one, I promise. So a student maybe a student has been taking let's say a normal or average, whatever, regular English class, and suddenly they want to bump to honors or AP. Do they have to have a teacher recommendation for that, or is it suggested or advised, or can they take whatever they darn well please when they sign up?
So I'm not going to give you a philosophical answer. I'm going to let Chris give you the actual answer.
Twofold answer. In the spring, in January, when we do subject selection, we always ask teachers to talk to their students about what might be the wise option for them. And really, truly, it's an opportunity to have a conversation with a kid that is perfect for honors or perfect for AP, to say, yes, you can do this. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what the student and their parent chooses for classes is what we honor. That being said, one of the exceptions to course changes is level changes. For example, I'm not the world's best mathematician. If I ended up in honors algebra, but I find a couple weeks in that that's not working for me, we can switch, and we can switch the other way too. Those are areas that's usually there are more classes and we have a little more opportunity to make those changes. But really, truly, it comes down to what does the student and their parent want to do.
This is just so interesting to me. I have the perspective on the other side as a parent of a high schooler, a junior, and so we've gone through this process and I giggled several times because of the dropping classes, because friends weren't in the classes, or sometimes in the friend group, it's because they are alone for lunch, and lunch is a big driving force for some of those scheduled changes. So it just was really interesting to go through this process. I thought it was great. Thank you for talking about all of this. One thing that jumped out when I saw newspaper there, so is it no longer a class? Because there still is, like at Craig, I know they still have a newspaper, correct? Well, they did last year. There were a couple of editions, but it was not monthly because when back in my day, it was monthly. And I actually recently spoke with a long retired instructor who was the newspaper supervisor. So this is just an interesting topic to see this.
One thing I would say is newspaper is a perfect example of how the world has changed and what's kids' interest and how we get our news. And it's really reflected in that this class is no longer popular.
Wow.
You know, if we had social media influencer to take its place, we would have it full. We would never need kids we'd be turning kids away. A newspaper, you know, that's a struggling industry now, which is sort of why we're not getting the traffic to that class.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is sad. I remember looking forward to that darn but I get the newspaper still, so I'm one
And
of
I'll
those
give you a
people.
perfect example of, right, looking at the experience level of people in the room. I took drafting. You can't find a high school anywhere that teaches drafting anymore. Now, computer-aided design, they will have you teach, but you won't find drafting tables anywhere. You won't find T-squares anywhere. Well, in art you will. The art teachers loved it that they got an endless supply of T-squares once we quit drafting. So it's being responsive to what are the opportunities post-secondary.
Well, thank you very much for this great presentation. I just always love hearing this stuff, and it's so helpful for us. So thanks for the time and putting this all together, and for everyone when you're building schedules. I know I'm glad that I'm not involved in that process. All right, everyone, that concludes our evening announcements and updates. I know we have our next PPC planning meeting next week, Monday morning. So if there's anything that needs to be brought to our attention, please let me know. And then, Denise, do you have any other things to share? Okay. All right, well, I will see you at our next meeting, and we are adjourned.